Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
The Space Race. Humanity's race to break through the barrier of the final frontier. A rivalry between two of the biggest superpowers in the world, which intensified tensions in the Cold War. A war between two different ideologies, capitalism and communism. After the end of World War II, US President Harry Truman was very suspicious of Soviet intentions, so on March 1947, he announced the Truman Doctrine to Congress, which would allow immediate economic and military aid to countries that were threatened by the Soviet expansion. Tensions were escalating between both sides, as both nations continued to develop a bigger and better nuclear arsenal. During the Cold War, the world was divided into two, and it was an ideological struggle between capitalism and communism. Both countries started proxy wars in other parts of the world, such as the Korean and the Vietnam War. One said would be a US-supported capitalist, while the other would be a Soviet-supported communist. Even though there was never direct war between the US and the USSR, many feared that the world was on the brink of a third world war. The Soviets had dominated the first half of the space race. On October 4th, 1957, they surprised the world by sending the first satellite into orbit, Sputnik 1, an 83-kilogram, 58-centimeter diameter satellite into space. On November 1957, the USSR launched another satellite, Sputnik 2, this time carrying a dog named Laika, the first living being to go into space. Not wanting to fall behind, the US launched their first satellite, Explorer 1, on January 1958. This was designed by the US Army under the direction of Wernher von Braun, a German rocket scientist. On April 1961, the Soviets shocked the world again as they launched Vostok 1, the first manned mission into space. On board was Yuri Gagarin, the first human to orbit Earth, in a 108-minute journey from launch to landing. He made one full orbit around the Earth before landing in Saratov, the southwestern region of Russia. In a span of the next 2 years, they sent 5 more humans into orbit, including Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman to orbit Earth. On February 1961, a year after the Soviets launched Vostok 1, the US launched Friendship 7. On board Friendship 7 was John Glenn, who became the first American to orbit the Earth. Later that year, President John F. Kennedy made a bold announcement that NASA would launch a manned mission to the moon before the decade. This proved to be the turning point in the space race. NASA's budget immediately increased by 500%, and the lunar program involved up to 400,000 employees. Instead of attempting to compete against the USSR, NASA decided to surpass it. It immediately shifted its goal to breaking a barrier that was dreamed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, landing a man on the moon.
I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I had earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
After hearing the US announcement, Soviet scientist Sergei Korolev, the chief engineer of the Soviet space program, said the next goal of the program was to land a man on the moon before the United States. However, he died the following year due to a heart attack. The Soviets still decided to continue the mission without Korolev, and it was a disaster. This gave the United States a chance to jump ahead in the space race, and surpassed the Russian space program. After a decade long of hard work by the US space program, the launch of Apollo 11 was televised for the world to see, a moment which could end with the fate of Apollo 1, which killed its entire crew and put the entire space program on hold, or it could finally be the moment where NASA breaks the impossible barrier of landing a man on the moon and officially winning the space race. On board the Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin E. Buzz Aldrin served as astronauts to NASA's first manned mission to the moon. They launched into space on July 16, 1969. As the commander, Armstrong got the lunar module onto the surface of the moon on July 20, 1969, with Buzz Aldrin on it. Michael Collins stayed on the command module. Armstrong went off the lunar module at 10:56 p.m.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
While making the first step on the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin then took around 2.5 hours getting samples, performing experiments and taking pictures. The Apollo 11 spacecraft came down into the Pacific Ocean west of Hawaii on July 24, 1969. They then received many awards. The moon landings led to the end of the space race, with victory being claimed by America. Following Apollo 11's moon landing, NASA would land 5 more missions on the moon. Since Apollo 17, the last of the Apollo missions, there has not been any manned missions to the moon. The Russians did attempt another 4 times to land a lunar landing craft between 1969 and 1972. All of them failed. However, not everyone saw the moon landing as a positive occurrence. With so much war and tensions in the world, many people viewed the race to the moon as a waste of national resources. Dissenters wondered why the money wasn't going to feed hungry people or end the Cold War, or they just didn't see what landing on the moon offered mankind. In fact, the Apollo missions following the first landing received less attention. Those opposed to the mission saw the loss of interest and the short lifespan of the program as proof of it having been a frivolous undertaking. However, the space race was a great success for mankind. New technology had been created, and humanity had finally broken one of the largest barriers of exploration. To this day, the space race continues. However, the space rivalry between the USSR and the US officially ended in 1975. The first multinational crewed mission, the Apollo-Soyuz joint project, was successful. The famed handshake in space cooled US and Soviet tensions. Over 35 years after it ended, there are now new contenders at what many call the second space race. This includes China's CNSA, Chinese National Space Agency, Japan's JAXA, Japan's Aerospace Exploration Company, and India's ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization. Private organizations also proved to be contenders, as they too have ambitious goals. SpaceX, one of the most well-known private space companies in the world, has already successfully launched the Falcon 9 and has started to build the Big Falcon rocket, which is planned to be the largest rocket in humanity's history, built to break a new barrier, reaching a celestial object located nearly 140 times further than the moon, humanity's next barrier, and the soon-to-be broken Mars.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control 9, to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown.